Good afternoon. Welcome to Sociology 1. Oh, hello. Yeah, a little interaction. That's kind of refreshing. I don't know what it is about today's students. They just don't want to interact much. But anyway, what was I going to say? So keep in mind we're doing things a little differently. Although, I don't know, maybe our syllabus is actually on track right now. But we are, our next exam is going to be next Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday. We won't have class next Monday. I'm going to be out of town, so we might not get much chance to review. I'm going to try to get through our last piece of material fairly quickly. It's on race, but the study guide for the exam has been posted on Canvas, and the lecture notes that you need to study for the study guide, including lecture notes covering what I'm going to cover today, which I haven't started covering yet. So hopefully you're all clear on what you're going to be doing in this class for the next 2 weeks. And we are still talking about symbolic interactionism. So again, just to remind you, we're still looking at race like we looked at gender, not so much as a biological fact about people that they are born with, but rather more as a socially constructed category that societies have created, constructed, and put people into those categories. We started to talk a little bit about race when we talked about binary oppositions and the linguistic construction of race. Language is one way that race is constructed. Just the very words we use to talk about people is part of what we mean by race. And the words we use, when it comes to race have changed over the years, partly in an effort to reconstruct our race relations. So when we used to talk about Oriental people, for example, well, that word isn't really used anymore. It's more politically acceptable to say Asian American. And same with black people. As we said, black and white, that's a binary opposition that probably distorts reality much more than it describes reality. And so people are saying maybe African American or other terms would be better to use. And same with white people. I mean, to assume that this whiteness, which applies to people as different as people from Russia, look at Russia, all the way across Europe, people count as white that come from Russia, middle of Europe, like Germany and Sweden and Scandinavian countries, Southern Europe, like Italy and Greece, and Eastern Europe and Western Europe, like England and France. Those are peoples with a whole lot of difference, much more difference than sameness. The fact that they all have white skin is one similarity, but really not that meaningful. And so to group them all together as the white people, as if that told us anything about them, is not very helpful. Same with black people. Africa was filled with all kinds of diverse cultures, diverse ethnic groups, different looks, different shapes, different sizes, but we group them all together as the blacks. And that's supposed to tell us something about them. It doesn't. It's a distortion of reality rather than a description of reality. And so language itself helps to create this reality, and people, in trying to recreate it, are hoping to use different words. That's why I don't get upset with the idea of political correctness. I think being politically correct is about trying to create a reality that we all accept. And some people would like to stay in a reality where blacks were referred to, for example, with the N-word, but that's not a reality most of us want to be in anymore, so we don't use that word anymore. And we're using new words to describe people. And you can call that political correctness, but I call it being polite in today's world, where we have to respect each other's humanity. Anyway, so language is one place, but there's other ways that race has gotten constructed. Laws are another way, and all kinds of things. I'm going to be drawing on a few different analyses of race. Part of the problem in America is we've constructed race literally as a black and white issue, because going back to our history, that's how race became an issue in America, is because of slavery and black and white people. But we have other racial groups in America today, so to just dichotomize it as just black and white is problematic in and of itself. So I'm going to be talking about black and white relations, but I'm also going to be talking about Latino people and Asian people. Those are the big three non-white groups in America. And so we want to try and understand a little bit better. And what I'm going to be doing is drawing on different sociological studies of these different categories. I'm going to start with the black and white issue, and I'm going to be drawing on a pretty famous article and book called Laissez-Faire Racism. It's by two sociologists named Bobo and Smith. I'm not big on having you memorize sociologists' names, but I am big on not plagiarizing people. So these ideas I'm going to be sharing are not from me, but from Bobo and Smith. And they're trying to understand racism in America today. And their general term for it is that Americans today, if they're racist, many of them, it's a kind of racism that Bobo and Smith want to call laissez-faire racism. What does laissez-faire mean? Anybody in here take economics?
Does it mean to leave alone?
Literally in French, it means hands off or let it be. And in economics, what does that mean? Should I pick on you again? I figured since you answered the first part of it, you would know the second part.
I knew from my history class. I don't know.
Well, you probably were learning about the idea of the free market. In other words, it's the idea that the government should take a hands-off approach to the economy. In other words, the government should let the economy be. In other words, the government shouldn't try to intervene in economic relationships. For example, the relationship between a boss and a worker. Should the government try to set standards like how much money the minimum you can get paid is? Well, some people say there should be no government regulation at all of business, and if businesses want to pay 1 cent an hour, they should be able to pay that. If people are willing to work for that. If they're not willing to work for that, then people won't pay that. So that's laissez-faire economics, is the idea that the government should let business be. Let business take its own course, and government shouldn't regulate it. And in other words, it means free market. And America is a country that likes to say that we believe in a free market, and we believe as much as possible in not having the government be involved in economic relationships. Laissez-faire racism is Bobo and Smith's term for how a lot of Americans feel today about race. If you ask today Americans, should the government be involved in race relationships? Should the government be trying to get black and white people, for example, to get along better? A lot of Americans will say, no, I don't think they should. Can you think of an example of a government regulation that would affect race relations that a lot of Americans might not be in favor of? Or John, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, you said the U.S., I guess the government doesn't.
Well, it's an ideology. We do have a lot of government involvement in business, but as an ideology of our country, we generally like to think that we're not like a communist country where the government runs the economy. We're a free market economy. So we say government hands off of the business. Now, we do set a minimum wage. That's one example, but that's an argument we have as a society. But when it comes to race, a good example would be something like affirmative action. I don't know if you've ever heard of affirmative action, but it's a policy that many schools have, or universities have, and states have, which says, okay, we've had discrimination in the past. For example, black people for many centuries in America weren't allowed to go to college. But nowadays, they do go to college, and that means they're at a disadvantage. If they're competing to get into, say, Berkeley against white people, well, they may be competing against kids whose parents went to college, and grandparents went to college, and great-grandparents went to college. But they're the first person in their family to ever go to college, so do they have a fair chance to get in? And affirmative action says, well, don't just make it random who gets in. If you have two qualified people, like a white guy with 1,500 SATs, and a black guy with 1,500 SATs, and they both have straight A's, who are you going to let in? Well, one mode of thought would be just flip a coin. They both can get in, but we only have one spot. Affirmative action says, don't flip the coin. Give the spot to the one who is from a group that was historically discriminated against. In other words, take a positive step, an affirmative step, to redress, to correct past discrimination. And so it's meant to affect non-white people. Women are another group that for a long time was discriminated against. And so affirmative action says, let's try to take positive steps to make sure women and non-white people can get spots in colleges and jobs and things like that. And a lot of Americans today say they're against this. They'll say, well, that's reverse discrimination. If and it's because a lot of Americans don't actually understand the policy. They think it's letting in unqualified people over qualified people just because they're from a different race. And that's not what affirmative action says. It says if you only have one spot for two equally qualified people, give a little extra weight to the race of the person who's not the non-white person. But it certainly feels like discrimination. If you're the white guy that didn't get into Berkeley and you had the qualifications to get in and somebody else who had qualifications got in but they were a different color, you feel like you were discriminated against. And so a lot of Americans say, I don't think I want the government making sure blacks and non-white people can get into colleges. If they're not going to help me, I don't want them to help them. It's the kind of idea a lot of people feel like. And so a lot of Americans today are what Bobo and Smith would call laissez-faire racists. They're people that don't think the government should be involved in redressing racial inequality. Why is that racist? Well, because according to Bobo and Smith, we do have an unequal society. Black people, for example, are generally lower down than white people in a lot of ways. They're not equal to white people. And so if you say if you say on a newspaper poll, I don't think the government should do anything about that, then you're saying, I'm okay with that inequality. I'm happy the way it is. I don't want the government to try and change that. And so Bobo and Smith are saying a lot of Americans today look at our unequal society and say, okay, it's unequal, but I don't think the government should do anything about that. And so in that sense, they're racist, meaning they're accepting a racist society. They're accepting a society that's not equal racially. And if it's not equal racially and you don't want to do anything about it, you're kind of saying, well, that's just how it's going to be. And Bobo and Smith say it's not a hateful kind of racism. It's not the kind of racism where you want to kill the other guy. That's a different kind of thing. But a lot of Americans today, maybe most today, buy into what they say this is our dominant racial ideology today. Meaning it's the official ideology of our country, really, in some ways. And it's also dominant in the sense that majorities of people tend to believe it. And so Bobo and Smith are asking this question, when and why did Americans start thinking this way about race? Because we haven't always thought that way. If you go back to the 1960s and you compare it to today, you see something kind of interesting. We can compare Americans on two different issues here. One is what we'll call their racial attitudes, meaning how do you feel personally about the other group? That's what we would call prejudice. If you've ever heard the word prejudice, prejudice is how you personally feel about another group. And if you prejudge a whole group and say, I don't like any one of them because I don't like the whole group, well, you're prejudging individuals based on their group membership. And that's prejudice. And I call that racial attitudes because you're asking an individual person how they feel like. And we measure this in things like surveys. So there's a lot of surveys that ask people things like, well, how would you feel if your daughter married a person of another race? How would you feel if a family of another race moved next door? So they're asking people individually how they feel about other races. But the other thing is, what about racial policies? Do you agree that the government should do this or that to help with the race situation? That's a different kind of survey question. And in the 1960s, people were pretty prejudiced in America. The majority of people, when they answered these racial attitudes questions, didn't feel all that comfortable with people of another race. No, I don't think I want my daughter marrying somebody of another race. No, I wouldn't want them living next door. Why don't they live in their own neighborhood? But when it came to racial policies back in the 60s, should the government do anything? Well, what was the government doing back then? Well, for one thing, the Supreme Court had ruled in 1955 that the South was not allowed to send black kids to one school and white kids to the other. That was segregated schools, and they used to say it's okay because they're equal, they're separate, but they're equal. And the Supreme Court said, no, even if they're quote-unquote equal, which they're not, that's not allowed. You can't separate people by race. You need to integrate. And the Southern power structure, like the governor of Alabama, said, I'm not going to segregate this, not going to desegregate the schools. And he stood out in front of the school gates and said, segregation now, segregation forever. So the President of the United States had a dilemma here. The Supreme Court's directing me as the chief executive to make sure these schools are desegregated. But this other chief executive, this governor of the state, won't do it. So what can I do? And what the president decided is, I'm going to send armed National Guard down to the South, armed troops to go down to the governor and say, open up the gates, dude. And they did do that. And the American people were asked, should the president send down the National Guard to the southern states and force them to desegregate their schools? And large majorities of people said, yes, they should. Another policy was the war on poverty. The poorest people in the country at that time were in the black ghettos of the north and all black areas. And there was this goal of the federal government to do a war on poverty, put massive investment of money into the poor areas of the inner cities to try and fix them up and make them better. And large numbers of Americans were asked, do you support the Great Society program and the war on poverty and trying to help these poor non-white people, get better? And large numbers of people supported. So people were pretty supportive of racial policies. Americans, majorities were. What if we look at nowadays at people's views on these things? When it comes to racial attitudes nowadays, people are pretty tolerant. People aren't all that race, prejudiced. When you ask people, how do you feel about another race moving in next door? Well, as long as they keep their lawn nice and don't let rusty cars be parked on their lawn and stuff, as long as they keep the property values up, I'll be okay with that. How do you feel about your daughter marrying a guy from another race? Well, if she loves him and he loves her and he's a good guy and has a good job, I don't have a problem with that. So people in general nowadays, at least when they're asked on a survey, will say things that sound pretty tolerant of other races. But when it comes to the racial policies, should the government, help black people get into Berkeley and Stanford, or make sure there's, have affirmative action? People will say, well, I don't know about that. Sounds like reverse discrimination to me. What about busing? That was another thing, because in some of the northern cities, you have schools that are segregated, but not by law, just by accident, because you have whole neighborhoods that are only white neighborhoods, and whole neighborhoods that are only black neighborhoods, or Latino neighborhoods. And so you end up with schools that are all white, or all black, or all Latino. And one government policy that tries to fix that is using school buses. Let's move some of the white kids over to the brown school and some of the brown kids over to the white school, and then we'll integrate them more. And when you ask Americans, are you in favor of busing to make sure the schools are well integrated, a lot of people say, not if it's my kid that's got to go to the other side of town to go to school. No, I'm not in favor of that. So people are pretty opposed nowadays to government policies meant to help create more racial equality in America. And that's right here what Bowen and Smith mean by laissez-faire racism. That majorities of Americans today are opposed to things that majorities of Americans back in the 60s were in favor of. So why did that happen? That's what they're trying to answer in their question. Where did this new ideology come from that says the government shouldn't do anything about racial inequality? And for that, to understand that, they say we have to consider that it's a dominant racial ideology. Oops, can you see me? No, I better move right here. Dominant racial ideology. We said that laissez-faire racism is the dominant racial ideology in America today. But what Bowman and Smith want us to understand is that's just what it is today. But to understand race in America, we got to go back several centuries. And we got to understand how the ideology has changed over time. What is a dominant racial ideology? Well, first of all, an ideology is a belief system. So it's a set of beliefs and ideas. In this case, Bobo and Smith are basically conflict theorists. And if you remember from conflict theory, ideology for conflict theorists is like a tool that the ruling people use. You've got a small number of ruling elites that have all the power, and they create ideology to try and keep everybody else from challenging their power. So it's a belief system. What's its purpose? It's to justify and explain what? Well, down here, economic and social realities. So this is the basic model that Bobo and Smith are suggesting. For us to understand how people think about race in America, we have to realize that their views on race are shaped by elites, belief system created by elites, by the people with power. The people with power and wealth in a society are the ones that control what books get published, what movies get made, what stories get told, what science gets published. The people with power and wealth are able to control basically what people know, or what they think they know, and what they believe. And so from a conflict theory perspective, ideologies are like tools that elites use to help justify and explain the system that they're living under that gives the elites all this power. So to make it clear, well, what was the economic and social reality in America from the beginning of our founding, from around 1600 when the first English settlers came over up until about 1865? What was our economic and social reality back then? Well, slavery was a big part of it. We say America was built by white people, but in a lot of ways it was built by non-white people because they were slaves the whole time, and the white people weren't necessarily doing a whole lot of actual work. But anyway, slavery is a very brutal system. I don't think today's students have a very clear picture in their mind of what slavery involved, because a lot of people today don't feel like we need to do anything about it. Oh, that was back then. Well, the things that were done back then can have very long-lasting consequences for people. But what kinds of brutal things were being done? Well, for one thing, going over to another continent and finding a bunch of unarmed people and using guns to make sure they come listen to you, and then chaining them up and throwing them in a big hole, and then waiting for boats to come, and then strapping them with chains to the boats, and then making them go on a long journey where they pee and poop all over themselves and aren't fed well. Then when they get there, you sell them off to the highest bidder, you breed them together. When they have children, you rip the children away from them and sell them to somebody else. You force them to be together sexually. You make them work sun up to sundown. You whip them when they won't work. You kill them when they try to run away and things. It's a very brutal system involving a whole lot of violence. And if you were part of the slavery system, or more importantly, if you were somebody who wasn't part of it, if you were like a poor white person that didn't own slaves, you might well be asking, like, is this system justified? Is it just for Christian people to go over to another continent and rip people out of their villages and force them to come work for ours? Is it justified? Is it Christian of us to, make them breed with each other and have babies and then take the babies away and sell them to other people? Is that okay? And especially if you're not the one making money off of it, you would be like, is it really okay? I don't see, is this fine? And if you're the one making money off it, well, you like it. It's a nice system. You're making all kinds of money. You're getting rich. You're at the top of an aristocratic social system. You get to have a big white house with big columns and all kinds of people calling you master. It sounds wonderful to you, but you need some ideology that says, it's fine what I'm doing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. So what was the dominant racial ideology during slavery times? Well, it was an ideology based on the notion of biological inferiority. In other words, this is where we get the whole concept of race. When I say that race is a pseudo-scientific concept, it was pretty much invented during slavery times by the elites of the slave system. They used to call it the race concept. And according to this race concept, the only true human race are the Caucasoids, the whites. They're the humans. And then you got these other sub-human races, like the Mongoloids. They're the Asians. And the Semites. They're the people from the Middle East, like Jews and Arabs. And the Negroids, the people from Africa. And according to this race concept, this race theory, Caucasoids are the only true human beings. They have all the intelligence, all the physical ability, all the blessings of God. And these other races are not blessed by God. That's why they're dark-skinned. That's why they're lesser. That's why they're inferior. And they can't do the things white people can. Like Asian people, they can't learn to read and write and do math. Right? And Jewish people, they're just incapable of being doctors or scientists or anything like that, right? Well, according to the race theory, yes, but I'm trying to point out things that hopefully today we see are just absurd because they're obviously not true. According to this theory, black people can't learn to read and write. Their just brains are incapable of it. That's clearly not true. They passed a law saying if you try to teach anybody to read and write that's black, we're going to throw you in jail. So the very fact that they passed the law means they didn't really believe their own ideology, because if you couldn't learn to read and write, why even pass a law? Is there a law saying you can't teach cows to read and write? No, we don't need a law, because you can't teach a cow to read or write. But you can teach black people because they're human beings. But according to this theory, they're not. They're the humans, they're the subhumans. So they're inferior, and that's why slavery is justified, because according to this theory, black people don't feel pain the way white people do. Black people don't love their children the way white people do. Black people can't take care of themselves and have villages and civilization without white people's help. All of this was untrue. If you'd never been to Africa, you didn't know how black people lived, but most white people hadn't. So this ideology made sense to them. And it made sense of slavery. And it said, oh, I guess it's fine if they're being enslaved. In fact, it's a good thing. In fact, according to this theory, it's a good Christian duty of white people to bring these black people over here and force them to work for us, because otherwise they would have nothing positive to do. Anyway, it's all an ideology that was created to justify slavery. And you really needed people with a different color skin to be slaves, because if it was just other white people, it would be too easy to, fake it or hide it. But it's very convenient to have a whole group of people that's a different color and say, well, they have to be slaves because they're just inferior, they're just bad. Well, eventually slavery didn't make any sense economically. Eventually you would be stupid to have slaves, because if you had slaves, you weren't going to make any money. Remember from earlier in this class, forcing people to work really long hours, that's one way to make money, but it's not the smartest way to make money. That's called absolute surplus value. And that only makes sense if you don't have machines. But if you have machines to make things, then that's a much more profitable way to make money. Now, cotton, which was the main thing that the slave system produced, cotton used to be a product that you really needed a lot of people working on. You needed a lot of people planting it and picking it. And if you need a lot of people working long hours to do something, then paying them zero is a pretty profitable way to do it. But once you have a machine to do it, once you have a cotton gin that can pick the cotton and other automated means of planting and harvesting cotton, then actually it no longer makes sense to have 100 slaves doing it, because 100 slaves cost money. You got to feed them, you got to shelter them. It's much better to just pay a couple of guys a small wage to run your machines. That's a much better way of making profit than working people sun up to sundown. So slavery ended in 1865. It ended partly because of the Civil War, but from a sociological standpoint, it also ended because economically it didn't make sense anymore. Because now all kinds of new machines were being invented. And these machines could do the job better than human beings could. And so from 1865 till about 1985 is when we had industrial capitalism in America. And when I say industrial capitalism, I mean factories. Factories producing stuff. And the elites who own factories, they're not necessarily the same elites who owned plantations. In fact, most of the factory owners were from the north, from places like New York and other places like that. And these northern industrialists, when they set up factories, they don't need an ideology anymore that says black people are inferior to white people. In fact, that ideology is not helpful anymore, because if I run a factory and I'm trying to hire you guys all to work in my chair factory like we did earlier in this class, then I'm just paying one wage. You guys work in my chair factory, you make $3 an hour. And if you want to complain about it, then go to some other factory, because that's the wage here. And one thing I don't want to hear from my workers is, you should get more pay because you're white, and he's not white, so he should get less than you. I don't want to hear any of that. The wage is $3. If you're willing to work for it, and he's staying. You're not willing to go $3? Bye-bye. So in other words, industrial capitalism is about wages. And if it's about wages, it's about paying one wage to the working people. And if you're an elite that makes money by paying people low wages to do your job, you don't really care what race they are, as long as they can do the job. So the new ideology in America became the ideology of biological equality. We're all the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same duties. In fact, we all need to go work hard. And that became the big ideology of America. Work hard. You'll get ahead if you work hard. And we don't care if you're black, white, brown, yellow, purple. If you work hard, you're going to get ahead. And if you get ahead, that's how you make it in America. And again, that ideology is very helpful if you're a factory owner. If you can just tell people, the reason I'm up here making millions and you're down there making $3 an hour is because I worked hard. So keep working hard. Don't look at a union. Don't do those things. Just keep working hard and you'll get more money. That became kind of the ideology. And the official racial ideology was there is no inequality. We're all the same. We're all Americans. And that was a pretty good ideology in that a lot of Americans certainly bought into this idea that I should be judged by the content of my character, not the color of my skin. And even Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement believed in this ideology. And a lot of us still do. But according to Bobo and Smith, we actually have moved on economically as a society, and our elites no longer make money by employing us in factories. In fact, how do our elites make money? Well, we learned that earlier in this class. The richest people in America have continued to get wealthy over the last 40 years. The working people have not seen their wages rise or their lives get better. So there needs to be a new ideology that explains why most working people aren't doing well in America, but our elites are doing really well. In other words, what's our reality now in America economically since 1985? We learned about it earlier in this class. Where did all our factories go?
To different countries.
So globalization. Globalization is the new economic and social reality that we're in America. And according to globalization now, our elites, how do they make money? Well, they are able to move their factories to other countries where workers work for a lot less than we do. And they're able to avoid paying taxes here because they can keep their profits in other countries. So if you're an elite now, you have new questions that need to be answered, new things that need to be justified and explained. A lot of Americans are asking it right now. We're having a presidential election where a lot of people are pissed off at the elites. Both parties, they say, well, the leaders of the Republicans, the leader of the Democrats, we don't like any of you. And I don't hear anybody saying, I'm really happy with the Democrats and really happy with the Republicans. People that like Trump don't like how the Republican Party's been doing things and certainly don't like the Democratic Party. And a lot of people that are voting for Hillary are doing it holding their nose. So a lot of people aren't happy with the elites. And the elites have some answering for. They have to answer for some things. Like, where did our jobs go? Why did we close all these great factories in America and send them to other countries? Where did our social safety net go? We used to have welfare in this country. We used to have a healthy social security system. We used to have a healthy healthcare system. And a lot of Americans are asking, why is it so hard to get healthcare? Why am I worried I might not have any retirement? Why, are poor mothers with children forced to work for poverty wages but aren't able to necessarily provide for their children? So a lot has changed in America, and the elites are doing better than ever. But they need an ideology, it would seem, to explain why things are justified the way they are right now. What's the ideology they give us? Well, it's basically an ideology of cultural inferiority. And this new ideology, this is what Bobo and Smith mean by laissez-faire racism. It's a new ideology that says, don't look at the government to explain why you're dealing with the things you're dealing with. It's your own fault. You don't have the right, you have the wrong values. You have the wrong ethics, like work ethic. Americans are being told today, for example, the reason our factories closed here and went to other countries, one thing we're told is because we Americans, you have too much of an entitlement mentality. You just want things handed to you for free, like a good job. But those Chinese, they don't feel entitled to a good job. They're going to work hard. They're going to work 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, working hard at their job. But you Americans, you feel entitled to your job. And so we had to leave. We had to go somewhere where people don't have entitlement. Another thing we're told in America is, you guys are all obese. You're all fat, sitting around fat and watching video games and playing video games and watching TV. But those people in India, they're not doing that. They're getting up early, they're working hard, they're trying hard. And so Americans are basically being told that these things that we're losing in America, it's our own fault we're losing them. It has nothing to do with the elites being greedy and wanting to go make as much money as possible. It has everything to do with working people being too fat and lazy, and poor people, working the system or cheating the system. In fact, welfare ended, if we look at the timeline we've talked about, 1985 is when globalization started to happen. NAFTA was passed in 1995. Right around 1995, that's also when welfare ended. And that was when Bill Clinton was president. And he said, we're going to end welfare as we know it. And it's not called welfare anymore. It's called temporary aid to needy families, or women, infants, and children, or there's different names for public assistance for poor people. But what it no longer is a system used to be, the idea was if you were a single mom, if you had a man that died or up and left you and you had children, that we as a society didn't want you working because then your children would be unsupervised. Instead, we wanted to give you a little wage, a little pay, so you'd stay home with your children. But in 1995, they said, well, we're stopping all that, and we're calling it the Personal Responsibility Act. And we're saying, if you better take personal responsibility for yourself. Meaning, you better go get a job, honey. And what I'm trying to suggest to you here is, maybe it wasn't the personal responsibility of poor women that was really the issue here. This idea was based partly on the idea that there's fraud in the system, welfare fraud. Is there really welfare fraud? Not that much, really. People talk a lot of it around here. I hear around here bad-mouthing poor people all the time. Oh, those poor people on welfare. Oh, look at Walmart, all those people at Walmart. Oh, look at those ladies on public assistance. And that anger itself, when people are angry at the poor people below them, that is part of this laissez-faire ideology, where instead of asking, why are the rich people so much richer than they used to be? Are they so much more valuable than they always were? Instead of asking that, we point our fingers downward and say, those poor people, they just get everything for free. And the fact of the matter is, most welfare money went to children who got food in the form of food stamps from their moms. So did we really expect them to go back to work? Is that why we ended welfare? So children would take more responsibility for themselves? What I'm suggesting to you is that's not the real reason we ended welfare. It's not because of welfare fraud, which is a very small portion of the federal budget. Even if all those women they said were cheating, it still wouldn't be anything in our national budget. The real reason we ended welfare is because elites left the country and stopped paying taxes, and their taxes were cut so much that the federal revenue went way down. And if the government has less money coming in, it can't keep buying everything that it does. So it continued to buy buy weapons and military operations and things, but it has to cut somewhere. Where does it cut? It tends to cut from the people least powerful to object to it, like poor women, poor non-white women. And so it's called the Personal Responsibility Act. But if you really look at when it happened, right after NAFTA, it's really part of that race to the bottom that we talked about. Our richest companies have left the country, and one of the things they've said is, if you want any jobs to stay in the country, you better cut our taxes, because we can go to other countries where we won't have to pay any. So why should we stay here paying taxes to America when we could go somewhere else? So American presidents and others have had to keep cutting taxes to try and be business friendly, keep our businesses here. But that means working people have less things available to them, like schools and social programs and other things. But rather than blame themselves, the elites don't say, yeah, it's because we're rich and greedy and we can make a lot more money somewhere else. That's why we need to stop paying so many taxes here. They don't put it that way. They say, we don't want to pay for poor non-white people. They have a sense of entitlement. They're just being lazy. They don't have a good work ethic. They're not being responsible for themselves. And it isn't just poor non-white people, it's poor people in general in America, and working people in general have been told that we're the problem. We are why globalization happened. In the same way that slaves were blamed for slavery. It's not that we're greedy business people that want to make as much money as possible by forcing people to work for us for free. That's not why we have slavery. We have slavery because they're inferior people that need to be enslaved. In the same sort of way, according to Bobo and Smith, our current globalization is happening not because corporations are greedy. That's not what they say. They say it's because American workers are too lazy and won't try hard, so we had to go somewhere else. Keep in mind, though, before NAFTA, most of these companies that left were very profitable. It wasn't like they were losing money. But anyway, so what Bob and Smith are, again, trying to point to a conflict theory way of looking at it here, that the reasons we've been given by our media, which is, again, owned by the elites, our news media, our TV stations, our movie studios, the answers we've been given about why things have gone the way they've gone in America have largely come from those elites. I think right now in this current election is when a lot of people are starting to disbelieve the elites and say, wait a second, a lot of us are much poorer than we are now. We know it wasn't because we were lazy or not trying hard or didn't believe in America. It wasn't because of that. That's the answer we've been given, and maybe we could believe it when it was just poor people we never met before. But when you start saying that about us and our own children, we start getting a little mad about it. And so Americans are fighting back in a kind of populist way. The people themselves are rising up a little bit against the elites. And I think that fits with what Bobo and Smith are saying. But still, there's a tendency in America for people at the bottom to blame each other for their situation. And poor white people oftentimes look at poor non-white people as the cause of their problems. And when you have a white elite candidate saying, I'm going to build the wall, and that's going to keep the people out that are causing your problems. Well, I don't know if he's right about that. But again, it's a common practice of people with power to say, don't look at me as the problem. Look at those people below you. They're your problem. And as long as people are angry at the people poorer than them or less white than them, they're not pointing the finger above. By the way, when we talk about welfare, I like to bring this up around here because some people would talk about corporate welfare. You may not be aware how much companies get free money from the government to do stuff. Around here, I hear people blaming poor people for getting free stuff from the government, and there is some of irresponsible poor people, I'll admit, around here. I see some of them in my classes. They might take the class as long as they need to get the benefit, but then drop or don't come anymore. But the vast majority of people, by the way, that come to Yuba College and are on public assistance are really trying to make the best of it and really move their lives forward, not just take advantage of the system. In fact, if you're at Yuba College right now, you're on public assistance. Even if you're not getting a BOG waiver or anything like that, the fact that you're at Yuba College means you're getting money from the taxpayer because the money you spent to go here is not enough to pay your way for being here. So who's picking up the rest of the tab, and it's more than you're paying, is the taxpayer. So everybody here is getting help from taxpayers to be here. But you often hear Yuba College students blaming, oh, those people getting help from the government, I'll never be one of them. And I just have to laugh because you are one of them right now. And most of you are making the best of it. It's a good investment by the government to invest in your education because you're going to go on to be great things and contribute back to society, and it's a good investment. And are there a few people in one or two of my classes that aren't making the best of it? Yeah. But that's not most people. But what about corporate welfare? How often do we look upwards and say, well, what about those rich people getting free money from the government? And around here you have a lot of what are called rice subsidies. I don't know if you know about this, but rice farmers are often paid by the government not to grow rice. So to sit on your ass and not do anything, here's $1 million. Why do they do that? Well, it's to keep the price of rice up, because if everybody who could grow rice grew it, the price of rice would go down and the country wouldn't make as much money off of rice. The government wouldn't make as much money off taxing rice. So they pay a little bit of money to people to say don't grow rice. That's a subsidy. That's welfare. That's government giving money to help our country. You rarely hear people complaining about those lazy rice farmers getting free money from the government. But it's the same sort of thing. It's your tax money being given away to somebody. But again, if you're an elite getting rice subsidies and you also own a newspaper, you probably make sure there's not too many articles in the newspaper about how you're getting these subsidies. But there'll be a lot of articles about, poor moms who cheated welfare, or the one lady they found who drives a Cadillac and still gets welfare, or something like that. So again, around here I see a lot of this, and when you ask people around here, should the government give money to poor people to help them up, a lot of people say they oppose that. I oppose food stamps, I oppose money for the poor. And yet, if you look at how much money does Yuba County get from the federal government? Yuba County, out of all the counties in California, we get some of the most money from the federal government. And it isn't just for the poor people, it's mainly rice subsidies. And then if you look at a county like Marin County, a very wealthy county in California, and you ask people there, Should the government give poor people money? A lot of people in Marin County say yes, they should. And then if you look, how much money does Marin County get from the government? Almost zero. So that's the irony. Marin County is a county that gets no money from the federal government, and the people of that county think the government should help people out with money. This is a county that gets all kinds of government money, and when you ask people in this county, should the government give people money? They're like, no, they shouldn't. So isn't that ironic? But that's part of this ideology, is people have been taught to believe that it's somehow wrong for the government to help people out. And even when they're the ones getting it, they think it's somehow wrong. So Bobo and Smith say this helps explain why so many Americans today say, when they're asked, should the government have affirmative action? People say, no, that sounds like reverse discrimination to me. Should we have welfare? No, that sounds like you're just helping poor people be lazy. They need to get up and get a job. What they're not doing is pointing their finger at elites and saying, well, how come we don't have more jobs in here? Even if people got off their feet, got off their butt, and went to look for a job, would there be one for them to get in this community? Why aren't they there? Where did the investments go? The capital went to other countries. So globalization is a big reason, according to Bowman Smith, why today many Americans are kind of confused about why their own lives aren't so great. And then they end up blaming people below them for the situation, which is exactly how the elites would like it to be. But there's another piece of the puzzle here. And that's what Bobo and Smith call group position. So going back to the 1960s and comparing them to now, something else is different, not just globalization. Back in the 1960s, whites as a group were far above blacks as a group. Yeah?
You mean in terms of numbers?
Yeah, so what do I mean above? What kinds of things would whites be above? So we're saying above, and I'm putting that in quotes. What numbers do you think we would look at as sociologists to decide if one group was higher or lower than another?
Education level?
So one thing would be education level. What average grade do you reach? Do you reach high school diploma or not graduate high school? Or do you reach college or grad school? So educational levels would be one thing. What else?
Home ownership? Property ownership?
Wealth. So one thing, keep in mind here, income and wealth are two different things. They're related. Income is how much do you make a year? And sociologists often look at that as a numeric measurement of how people are doing. But it doesn't tell you everything, because you might make a lot one year and not so much the next. But income, or you might have a lot of income, but you're spending it all. But wealth is a whole other thing. Wealth is how much assets you have, how much money you have stored up. So it's one thing to get a certain amount each year, but are you able to amass wealth in things like houses, or cars, or boats, or bank accounts, or stocks, or bonds, or those kinds of things? And on all these basic measures of social well-being, whites or group well-being, whites were far above blacks in the 1960s. Where are they now, do you think? Where are whites compared to themselves in the 1960s? And here you can think of the movie Two American Families. Because another reason I wanted us to watch that movie is I'm going to keep referring back to it because it relates to gender, as we've already seen, and race. But thinking of the Newman family, do you think Tony and Terry Newman are better or worse off than they were as kids? And we didn't get to see in the cut of the video that we saw, we didn't get to meet Tony's parents. But if you saw the earlier version that was called Surviving the Good Times, they showed Tony's parents. Tony's parents were already retired at the age of like 60. They were already living in their country house. So while they were working, they had bought a second house. They owned one house, they bought a second house, and they were two people that worked in the same factory that Tony had worked in. So they had worked their whole lives in the factory, the mom and the dad. They had been able to buy one house and buy another. Then they were able to retire young and sell their house in town and go live in their country house full time. And so they were living a pretty good life. And Tony Newman, the white guy, remembers growing up in the house that his parents had bought and going to their country house in the summer and on the weekends and stuff. Now here he is as a dad with 3 kids, And they were struggling to buy their house and were getting foreclosed on. And he lost his good factory job and he wasn't sure when he was going to retire. So Tony Newman was not doing as well as his parents were. And then think of Tony Newman's kids. His kids were the ones that weren't living with their children's moms and were trying to go back to community college and get like their auto certificate. And one was being a landscaper. And so they were not doing as well even as their dad had done. So whites as a group are lower than they were in the 1960s. And globalization has a lot to do with that. Because a lot of white people were in that blue-collar middle class that we're talking about. People who were able to graduate high school and go into the middle class working at good factory jobs. And it's those jobs that have largely gone away because of globalization. So whites are not as well off as a group as they used to be. Some whites are much better off than they used to be. But generally speaking, whites' income is down, their wealth is down, their educational levels are down. What about blacks? Are they better or worse off in the 2000s than they were in the 1960s, do you think?
Better.
Blacks are better off than they were, but still not as high up as they would have liked to be, as Martin Luther King dreamed they might be. The civil rights movement did help. It opened up spots in education, it opened up jobs, it opened up housing opportunities. So blacks are much more likely to own their own houses, for example, now than they used to be. But they're still not as high as whites, and they're not even as high as they would be if globalization hadn't happened. Because again, if you look at the Stanleys, they were a family that was doing better at the beginning of the film than they were towards the end. And they too had good blue-collar middle-class jobs in a factory, and then were forced to get lower paying jobs with less stability and less security and less retirement options. So less wealth. They were able to keep their house, but they said we would be so well off if we had been able to pay off our house a long time ago and saved our money. So the point here is whites and blacks are much closer together as groups nowadays than they were in the 1960s. And if you ask white people today, like if you ask Tony Newman, should the government have special programs to help the Stanleys? Tony Newman's probably not a hateful guy, probably not a prejudiced guy that doesn't like black people. He probably is fine with black people. But when he's asked, should the government help them? He might say, well, what about me? I need help. My kids are struggling to get into college. I'm struggling to hold on to my house. I'm struggling here in America, so why would you help them but not help me? And you could see how a lot of white families today would feel the similar way. Like, I'm not doing so hot, so why are you helping the black people? Are they really so much worse than I am? And same with black people. I mean, they might not want to help the Stanleys. I mean, in other words, when the Newmans, when the groups are so close together, they don't necessarily feel all that different and don't necessarily feel that there needs to be any government help for one group and not the other. But again, both groups are kind of unaware of this group up here. It's the elites that might be white, might be black, might be Asian, all kinds of races that have really done much better and are way off in another world compared to the rest of us. But that's, so Bobo and Smith are trying to explain here, why do Americans have the racial views they do, and why do they change over time? And here they're challenging one of the long-held theories we used to have in sociology. We used to say that racism and education were somehow linked together. In other words, there was this idea that as America becomes more educated, as more and more people graduate high school, more and more people graduate college, that we'll be less and less racist. Because the idea was racism is ignorance. And when people are ignorant of each other, they just naturally fear each other and hate on each other. And as people become more educated, they'll become more aware of difference and more accepting of difference and less hateful towards each other. And so our old model used to look like this. Education levels go up, more and more people graduate college and high school, education goes up, while racism or prejudice goes down because people are less ignorant and more used to dealing with other people. That's the old model. But Bobo and Smith are showing us that it's probably more accurate to say that racial tensions kind of ebb and flow. They go up and down. there might be times of a lot of racial hostility, and times of less, and times of more, and times of less, and times of more, and times of less. In other words, this is what's called a linear understanding of racism, that it inevitably goes down as this other line goes up. This line goes down, this line goes up. This is what statistician would call a curvilinear pattern that goes up and down over time. And what accounts for the up and down? Well, so group position. When whites are far apart from blacks, they feel much more willing to help them and much more generous and much more, oh, sure, yeah, I love those people. That's fine, yeah, go ahead. But times when the groups are closer together, people feel a little more tension about it. No, I don't want you to help them. They're going to take my job. They're going to take my neighborhood. They're going to get what I have. Instead of I'll give them a little bit of what I already have, it becomes a feeling like I'm going to lose what I have to them. And so it's not just a matter of ignorance. It's a matter of feeling comfortable in your own group and whether you feel your group is secure. And when people feel their own group is not secure, they might feel a little more threatened by this other group. And more willing to believe ideologies that, confirm that for them. So again, they're trying to get us to see, and so globalization is one of those things that's helped to increase the tension. It's made the groups closer together and therefore made the hostility and tension a little higher. But like I said, we can't look at everything in America through the lens of black and white, and that polarized way of looking at things is a big problem in a lot of ways for us. And for one thing, it excludes the other groups. So where do they fit? If you're not black or white, where do you fit into America's racial dynamic? And so we'll talk about Latinos, but the next group I want to talk about is Asian Americans. So laissez-faire racism, by the way, I would say that's the most difficult concept I teach in this class, because if you really were listening, we kind of covered a lot of ground there of history, of social models and how ideology works and changing economics over the last several decades. So there's a lot there to understand, and maybe you didn't quite get it all, but there's a lot of questions on our test about it. So you want to make sure you understand what I just said about laissez-faire racism. If you need to go back and rewatch the video, that might help. If you need me to answer questions about it, maybe on Wednesday we'll have some time to get back to that question. Asian Americans, my spiel about them is a little more simple. I'm going to be drawing on the work of Ancheta. Gloria Ancheta is her name. Again, not that you need to memorize it, but I'm not plagiarizing. And her emphasis on what we can call the racialization of Asian Americans. And the fact that she uses that term, racialization, should be a clue to you that she's looking at things the way a symbolic interactionist would. In other words, and the way generally a sociologist would, she's not seeing race here as something you have, as a trait you have, like your knee or your shoe size. It's a process. It's a process of categorizing people, of marking them, of labeling them and marking them and categorizing them. And so instead of talking about Asians as having a race, she wants to talk about the racialization of people that have Asian, characteristics or have Asian ancestry. And she says there's two main ways Asian people have been racialized in America. And I believe Gloria Ancheta, she has a Spanish surname, but I believe she's Filipino. And the whole status of the Philippines is kind of interesting right now, because right now they're basically divorcing America. For a long time, the Philippines and America were really tight, and lately the Philippines have been saying, bye-bye, America, we're going to go hang out with China now, not with you guys. So it's interesting. But anyway, Filipinos are a mixture of Latino and Asian in a way. But anyway, racialization of Asian Americans. Two main ways it's happened. One is what she calls immigrant racialization. And the other one is foreigner racialization. Immigrant racialization is sort of softer, less hostile, it's non-hostile. Whereas this is a stronger, the foreigner racialization is a stronger form of racialization, and it's more hostile. But what are they? Well, first of all, let's keep in mind, part of her argument here is that whiteness in America is defined simply as normal. If you're white in America, you're just considered an American person in a lot of cases, and people don't necessarily even call you white. They say, oh, it's that American guy. Whereas if you are an Asian person or you have Asian features, in America, you're in some ways always considered not quite a normal American. You're either categorized as somehow an immigrant or as a foreigner. But keep in mind, just because you're white doesn't mean you're any more American than an Asian person. In my case, the only flaxes, if I try to trace back the first person that came to this country that I'm connected to genetically, it's my grandma on my mom's side, and she came over in 1905. So I can say my claim to being American only goes back as far as 1905. If you're Asian, though, if you're, say, Chinese American person from Marysville area, you may well have ancestors here that go all the way back to like 1845. So you've been here a lot longer than I have. But if I walk down the street in Marysville, nobody ever goes up to me and says, excuse me, do you speak English? They look at me and go, dude, what's up? What time is it? You got a quarter? You know? But if you're an Asian person, if you're walking down the street, people might treat you in ways that make you feel or let you know that they don't see you as just a regular American. They see you as an immigrant, as somebody who's here more recently than they are. Even though, in the case I'm giving, the person who says to me, are you American? You know, they're not realizing they're saying, do you have the time? They're not realizing I'm less American than the Chinese guy whose family's been here longer. The Chinese American guy, I even just did it. I called him Chinese. He's an American guy whose ancestors came from China. And I'm a white guy I'm an American guy whose ancestors came from Europe. But I don't get asked questions like, do I speak English? Do I have my green card? You know, if you go for a job. And so these are the kinds of little subtle things. And so maybe I should say it's subtle. It's not like out in the open. It's not like, hey, you immigrant. But it's little subtle things, what we might call microaggressions. People are calling those nowadays. I don't know how I feel about that term. But they're little small signals that the person's giving you that they don't see you necessarily as the same as them, as just a regular old American. I see you as a new American. You must be new because you're not white. And there again, my only difference between the Asian person is I have white features. So because I have white features, I'm counted as white. And that wasn't even always true in this country. Jewish people who first came here were considered, and I even read an article the other day where the guy was referring to normal white people and Jewish people as another group. I was kind of happy he did that because a lot of people think of Jew as just a religion, as a choice, but it's an ethnic group, and we weren't always included as this white ethnic groups, one of the white ones. But anyway, Asians to this day are not included in the white group and are therefore excluded in subtle ways. Foreigner racialization is a more hostile, more overt way of othering, is a word we could use here, to other the person, to say, I don't see you as one of me, I see you as one of them. And this is a more extreme version of that. This is when Asian people are treated not as if they were a new American, but as if they're not American at all, as if their loyalty is to the Asian country that they themselves or their ancestors came from. Can you think of a time in American history when a whole Asian group was treated as if they were foreigners rather than as regular Americans who were born here like you and me?
After Pearl Harbor?
So World War II, the internment of Japanese Americans, is a classic example of treating an Asian group as if they were foreigners, internment. Now, we were at war. The reason that was done, ostensibly, was, well, you said Pearl Harbor. The Japanese bombed us, and our government said, see, we can't trust Japanese Americans because we're now at war with Japan, and we can't trust Japanese Americans, so we're going to have to round them up and put them in camps and keep an eye on them. Now, we were at war with Italy, too. and Germany too. Did we round up Italians and Germans and put them in camps? Yes. Yeah, actually we did, but the extent to which we did proves the point I'm making. Very few Italians and Germans got rounded up. And the ones that did get rounded up were ones that had done something that showed that their loyalty might be to Germany or Italy. Like before the war, they had been the head of the German club, or they were the head of the Support America club, or they were a member of the Nazi Party or something, or Support Italians or something like that. In other words, they were activists of one kind or another that had been involved in activities that showed that maybe we shouldn't trust them because maybe their loyalty is to another country. But in the case of Japanese Americans, it was the whole group, the entire group was rounded up, and the children, and the women, and not just activists. So yes, I recently learned this. I didn't know it until recently. We did lock up some Italians and some Germans during the war to keep an eye on them, but it was a very small group in either case, and it wasn't whole families, and it wasn't the entire population of that group. The Japanese Americans, a different story. And so the basic difference seems to have been race. Somehow our government said because they're a different race, because their eyes are shaped differently, because their hair is shaped differently, and their skin's a different color, therefore they're much less trustworthy than these Italians and the Germans. And some people might argue back at me and say, well, it was a sneak attack, that's why. Well, that doesn't hold water either, because the Germans were sneak attacking us. They kept their submarines were bombing our cruise ships and our cargo ships without warning us. That's a sneak attack. But we didn't say, those Germans, you can't trust them, they're so sneaky. But we said that about the Japanese, and they started using demeaning terms like Japs. There was Japs over there, and these Japs here. And so it was definitely based on race was the main difference between Japanese and Italians and Germans. And so that's a case of racialization, of saying because they're a different quote-unquote race, we can't treat them the same way as this other group of people. And what we also forget is one of the most decorated fighting groups during the war was a unit of Japanese American soldiers that actually fought very well for America. But anyway, so again, Anchetta is helping us see that racism isn't just a matter of, or prejudice, isn't just a matter of people's individual feelings about another group. That's, by the way, prejudice. That's when individual people feel a certain way, that's prejudice. When we talk about racism, it's really more appropriate to use that word to talk about a society. Is a society racist? Rather than speaking of an individual person as being racist, people may well be prejudiced against certain races. And that you could call that racism. But sociologists are more likely to refer to a society as being racist. And a society is racist if it is unequal in terms of race, where some people, just because of their race, are above other people just because of their race. And if people are treated a certain way just because of their race. And so in this case, treating a whole group of people as different just because of their race is an example of racism. But what she's also trying to show is it isn't about ignorance. So again, if we try to ask about when do we treat Asians as immigrants in this country, and when do we treat them as foreigners, it again seems to be something that goes up and down. There's times when we're really hostile to our Asian people in this country, and times when we're less hostile, and times when we're very hostile, and times when we're not so hostile. And so these peaks would be the foreigner times when they're treated like foreigners, and these valleys would be more like when they're treated like immigrants. And this is a timeline here. So what are the times when they get treated like foreigners and the times when they get treated like immigrants? Well, Anchetta says basically we're more likely to get hostile and stronger in our hostility towards Asian Americans when America itself is threatened or feels threatened by an Asian country. One or more Asian countries. So World War II was a time like that. We felt threatened by Japan. We were threatened by Japan. And so that was a time, so this is like 1945 right here, or 1941, when the foreigner racialization got very pronounced. The 1960s, though, were a time when hostility towards Asians was very low, and we started watching all these movies from Japan, like Godzilla movies and stuff, and America got very interested in Japanese culture, and it was like they were our little buddy across the sea that made movies like we did and made cars like we did. So the 60s were a time of low hostility. The 1980s, though, were another time when America felt threatened by Japan. Why was that? Well, Japan started doing really well with its cars. Honda and Toyota and Nissan were outselling American cars. And so Americans started saying, what's up with those Japanese? They're kicking our butt economically. And you started to see hate crimes go up in America, and graffiti and other things against Japanese and against buying Japanese cars and stuff like that. The 2000s might be another time when it goes up. Which Asian countries are threatening America right now? North Korea, I don't think we're too afraid of North Korea. I mean, they're a little tiny, crazy country. They might have a few nuclear weapons, but they keep saying they could reach us. Huh?
Are we having an issue with Russia?
Russia, are they Asian or not? I don't know. They're trying to decide right now. Are they the West? Are they Europe and part of NATO and part of the European Union? Or are they Asia? And I don't know. Putin seems to want to be both. But China is a very big country in Asia that's very threatening to America. They're bigger, their economy is booming, they are taking a lot of jobs, they're doing a lot of stuff over there. So a lot of Americans feel like China is our problem right now. India is another country that's booming economically, that's starting to, we've talked about manufacturing jobs going to China. Well, service jobs could go to India very easily. They have a lot of doctors over there, a lot of teachers, a lot of engineers, a lot of things that we design or do over here could easily be done over there and, virtually brought back here. I could imagine all our sociology classes being taught by Indian professors over TV. They'd probably do it a lot cheaper than I'm doing it. And you could probably get operated on by a virtual robot operated by an Indian surgeon somewhere. So you could imagine even our service industries being offshored to countries like China and India. So Americans' jobs and our security is at risk from these Asian countries. And are we seeing any increased hostility towards Asians in this country? To some extent, yeah. I mean, a case a few years ago that kind of got all over the internet was this girl. I guess she did like a little selfie video of herself in the UCLA library. And she's like, what's with all these Asian students? They all take over the library and I can't even find a place to work. And she was like, all pissed at all the Asians at UCLA and how she's struggling because of all these Asians. And, people watched on the internet and they're like, maybe you're struggling because you didn't try hard enough in school. I mean, you're blaming the Asians because they're in the library. But anyway, so she was obviously very hostile towards Asian people. There's also been a lot of hate crimes recently against Sikh men. Maybe that's because of terrorism and people mistaking Sikhs for Muslims, but I don't know. I think there might be some hostility towards Indians and India's success economically, and people worried over here of Indian people here might be, they don't think of them as Americans and being more loyal to India or something like that and feeling like they're not true Americans or real Americans. So I'm not Asian. Can't speak to whether you're sensing any greater hostility in the 2000s than earlier in your lives. A lot of you haven't lived necessarily that long, much longer than that. But certainly in the current period is a time when America is feeling threatened by Asian countries. And so you might imagine that it's a time of increased hostility. One case I always point to is Wen Ho Lee. Wen Ho Lee, a few years ago now, China turned out to have this military software that we didn't think they had. It was software that allowed them to test nuclear weapons virtually. Instead of actually blowing up a nuclear weapon to test it, you could fake test it with software. And I guess this is very complicated software that the US thought only we had, and then it turned out China had it. So America automatically assumed it must be somebody here, some spy here, sold the secret or gave the secret to China. So then they went to the FBI went to the Los Alamos National Labs where the software was developed. And they go down the list of employees, and they decide to focus on a guy named Wen Ho Lee. And when they were asked, well, why did you ever suspect Wen Ho Lee? What evidence did you have on Wen Ho Lee? They said, well, he had a Chinese name. So that was the whole reason they went after Wen Ho Lee. They put him in solitary confinement for a whole year, trying everything to find any evidence. After a whole year of solitary confinement, they asked, why solitary confinement? he's not guilty of anything yet. Because I don't know, maybe he can communicate with the Chinese with his like eyelids or something like that. I don't know. It's like paranoia is what I'm getting at. The federal government was very paranoid about this one guy with a Chinese name. After the year, they had nothing. They're like, we can't, there's no evidence he did anything wrong. And he kept saying the whole time, I'm an American person, I'm an American citizen. My name's Wen Ho Lee, but I'm American. I have American children, I'm American. Why are you accusing me of being a traitor? And I think also it came out too, maybe it wasn't any secret. The Chinese maybe just developed this software too, that they're smart enough to do that. So what I'm saying is, I think this was a case of fear and paranoia about Chinese espionage when it was probably American incompetence that was the problem. Anyway, so that was an example of foreigner racialization. All right, we'll come back. It sounds like we will have time to review. So I'm done. Oh, I'm going to talk about Latinos at the beginning on Wednesday, but we'll have some time for review. So please look at the review guide, the lecture notes, and come prepared with some questions that you weren't able to answer yourself from the study guide.